This is Heritage Words, a podcast about the words we've inherited from our ancestors and the meaning they bring to our lives. Heritage Words is produced by the HUC Jewish Language Project, which raises awareness about Jewish ancestral diversity through the lens of language. I'm the host, Sarah Bunin-Benor. In May, I had the pleasure of attending a conference at The Kitchen, a progressive congregation in San Francisco. They brought together Jews from around the world who are involved in Sephardi prayer and culture. We celebrated Shabbat together, enjoyed a glorious concert, and learned from several lectures and panels. One of the sessions was a live taping of this podcast. I interviewed 3 participants whose ancestors lived near the Mediterranean: Ariel Lazarus, Nissimmi Naim-Naor, and Samuel Torjman Thomas. Ariel Lazarus is a composer, guitarist, conductor, and scholar specializing in Sephardi music. He directs the Israeli Ladino Orchestra, and he's a postdoctoral fellow at Bar Ilan University. He has ancestors from Gibraltar. Nissimmi Naim-Naor is a rabbi chef and a TV persona working in the realms of identity, peoplehood, and culture through food. He leads a synagogue in Jerusalem, and he has ancestors from Tripoli. Samuel Torjman Thomas is an ethnomusicologist, multi-instrumentalist, composer, and educator. He teaches at the City University of New York and directs the New York Andalus Ensemble. He has ancestors from Morocco. Enjoy our conversation.
I'm Samuel Torjman Thomas. I identify as a Moroccan Sephardic open source flexodox adaptodox global Jew, and also as a musician and ethnomusicologist interested in the world of Jewish music. Sorry, 2 cents.
Oh, that's great.
I am Nissimmi Naim-Naor from Jerusalem, and I'm a rabbi and that was 1 sentence, I think.
Rabbi and a chef. Okay.
I am Ariel Lazarus. I'm the director of the Israeli Ladino Orchestra, a musician, and a father of 3.
All right. Well, we want to now hear where your ancestors are from, when they left that place, and where they ended up, and how you ended up where you are.
So, my ancestors. Well, we'll start with my mother's side. It's Mother's Day, and probably the most impactful on everything that I just put forward, or very, very impactful on it. My mother was born and raised in the Melah of Casablanca. She is from what would have been defined as a mixed marriage in its day. Her mother of Sephardi background in Rabat, from Rabat, and her father, Shlohi, or Berber Tamzir Jew. I've done some ancestry DNA, and it took a while for them to catch up with the Sephardic story. So it checks out with what I know about my genealogy. On my mom's side, on my father's side, my father moved to Morocco when he was 18. As a US GI, and he's part of a story of that experience where there were a number of GIs who married into the Moroccan community. He was one of them who came to Morocco in 1958, at the tail end of the US presence in Morocco, and became part of the Jewish community there. And he had got to know a lot of Jews coming to the base. And that's how he met my mother. He was not born Jewish. He was from the mountains of Virginia. In fact, I'm a son of the Revolution, back to the founding Virginia settlement and Cherokee Indian as well. And but my father, when he got to Morocco and met Jews and Arabs, he said, "Oh, I've never really bought the Jesus principle, so this really makes a lot more sense to me." And then became close to the Jewish community. And they married. My oldest brother was born in Casablanca before the family relocated here to LA, first in Northern California, where I really grew up, with a stint in Germany, close to family in France, which so much of my family had moved to from Morocco. So yeah, that's a little bit.
My family came, all four of my grandparents came from Tripoli, Libya, which, as I'm sure you know, is very different from being just Libyan. The Tripolitanian people take huge amount of pride in being the residents of Tripoli, the capital city of Tripoli, of Libya. They also kind of feel themselves Italian, since Libya was an Italian colony. So they all have great passion towards Italy, and some Italian costumes, some Italian dishes, and surprisingly, my grandmother is also fluent, speaks fluent Italian, which I only discovered when we were together in Rome almost 20 years ago. And my family arrived in Israel between the 30s and the 50s. My father's side arrived on the 30s, before the state of Israel was established. And they lived in Givat Shmuel, which used to be this teeny tiny village about 15 minutes away from Tel Aviv. And my mother's side arrived at the 40s and at the early 50s. And my grandmother, my mom's mom, arrived in 1951, when actually the entire Jewish community of Tripoli had to run for their lives. Some went to Rome, and some went directly to Israel. Our family came to Israel. Both of my parents grew up in Givat Shmuel, which is this Tel Avivi suburban. And I was born and raised in Tel Aviv itself. And almost 20 years ago, moved to Jerusalem. And when I met my wife, we were both already very invested Jerusalemites. And it was obvious that we're staying, so we live in Jerusalem with our 3 beautiful daughters.
Hi, so my mother made Aliyah from Gibraltar, which is a thriving Jewish community at the end of the Mediterranean. For us, it's the end of the Mediterranean, not the beginning, because everything begins with Israel, of course. And she comes from a family where her father, my grandfather, Avram Benisso, was the cantor for almost 65 years in the Jewish community of Gibraltar, and a very prominent figure for me. Also, as I said before, the only person in my life when I was growing up that didn't think if I borrow from Yiddish, I'm a shigana, that I want to become a musician. So I owe him also on that sense. From my other side, my late father Chaim, actually his yahrzeit is this week, so I would like to dedicate whatever I will play today for his memory. So he is from a kibbutz, and he was the only child of Holocaust survivor from Germany. But since he spent some periods of his childhood in South America, in Buenos Aires and in Montevideo, so when my mother made Aliyah, he was the only guy in the kibbutz speaking Spanish. So that's how they met. And I was raised in a home that beside Hebrew, we had Spanish, Haketia, Llanito, all these sort of mixing dialects of the Jewish Hispanic world.
Tell us a little more about Llanito.
Okay, so Llanito is the dialect of Gibraltar, which is, you're a chef, so you know when you put a lot of ingredients together, something very special comes. So Gibraltar has a colonial background of British rule, Jewish establishment not far from the expulsion, Muslim influence. So the Llanito is a bit of all that. It's the basis is Andalusian Spanish, but there is also influence of Haketia that the Jews of North Africa and for Ceuta and Melilla brought, and English, like British English. For example, you have words that you don't have anywhere. It's not my heritage word, so like marchapié for a pedestrian, like march, pied, the foot, or tipa, like teapot, but more Spaniard. So this is a very special mixture, and it's called Llanito.
Okay, so we have 3 people from pretty close to each other ancestrally, from Morocco, Gibraltar, and Tripoli. and they ended up in different parts of the world. And as happens in modernity, their families shifted to a new language, Hebrew in the case of Israel and English in the case of the US. So the question is, what have you maintained from your ancestral cultures? And it seems that you have maintained Nissimmi cooking, and that the musicians have maintained music and there's perhaps some liturgical traditions. So I want you to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into the heritage words. Let's start with Nissimmi.
So first of all, I want to say that undoubtedly, and no offense, I got the better part from the tradition because I'm sorry, I really love music, but food is
As a
essential.
Moroccan man, we all cook. Big time in the kitchen too, trust me.
That would be actually the first time I'm meeting a Moroccan man
No.
who's actually cooking. That's
But in Israel, that if there's food and music, food wins. Like nobody would listen to a concert on an empty stomach. In Europe, it's different. They will starve, but listen to your last note.
I just want to say, as you know, in Israel, we're basically Mediterranean people. Like, let's get ourselves something to eat first, and then the music would be
A little
nice.
swing.
Yes, and I want to say that as a child, my grandmother made aliyah with her family from Tripoli, mainly my mother's mom, Savta Miriam. So she made aliyah when she was 9. And as a child, I didn't even notice the fact that she had an accent, because she doesn't speak with het and ayn, and really her Hebrew is very, very fluent, and she does not have an accent. And it took me a while to notice that something happens when she talks to her siblings. Because when she talks to her siblings, even though they speak Hebrew, all of a sudden, they all have a very, it's not thick, because the Tripolitanian accent is not thick. But all of a sudden, instead of saying resh, the letter resh in Hebrew, which sounds like an R, they're saying the letter gimel, which sounds like a G, because that's part of Tripolitanian punctuation. And there's this joke when you say in Hebrew, Arnevet ratza ratza ratza, basubar v'draspa, which is just, a stupid line for kids. That means that there was a rabbit and it ran and ran and ran, and then came a Subaru and ran across it. And you're saying it as a Tripolitanian, so it's Agnevet, Gatsa, 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 Basubako, Vedagasoka. Because the Tripolitanians are always switching the R's into G's. And they also have, and again, I know this as someone who speaks Arabic, because I studied Arabic in school and got to talk, with Palestinian and Arab people in Israel. So I read and speak Arabic, which is a different dialect of Arabic. The Palestinian Arabic, the Israeli Arabic has a different dialect than the Tripolitanian one, and the Tripolitanian one has the tendency of ending letters with a ch instead of t. Every time a word ends with the letter taf or t, if we were speaking English, the Tripolitanian people would say like a ch, and then instead of saying khalatli, which means in Arabic he told me or she told me, they would say khalchli. So that's say part of the Tripolitanian accent and pronunciation that are very vivid. And every time I'm meeting a Tripolitanian, I'm always saying, Israel has so many Moroccans and Jerusalem has so many Kurds. And I always say that the Tripolitanian were a very, very small nation surrounded by enemies. And these two things, like replacing the R's with G's and replacing T with Ch, are very, very commonly Tripolitanian.
So I'm going to circle back on the music aspect. So you were talking about, food was a major presence in our home too. And as I said, like my father really adopted the Moroccan, that's what he knew of Jewish culture, right? And he was 18 when he got there, so it was very formative years. So he comes to America with my mom, and that's what he understood. So he didn't have this American frame of reference really of Jewish life in America, which is predominantly Ashkenaz. But what really then permeated the house, the language they really spoke was French, which was, of course, the language that Moroccan Jews preferred to speak in Casablanca as much as possible. Although he was familiar with Arabic too, because he was engaging with the Arab population, and that's what my grandmother spoke mostly. But to get back to the music, we're talking about heritage words. For me, the music was heritage words. It was the language that was very prominent in our home. And so the Sundays were always permeated with Arabic music that my parents listened to. Both of them lovers of this. It was reminded them from their youth, where they came from, everything. So for me to hear and later on to learn Arabic, to sing in Arabic, came only from the dialect of North Africa. So that was normative for us, for sure. But it was within the context of this musical language. So it was a very, very important part of the heritage, a way that we connected to our heritage at home was the music. Not knowing that I would end up going into music. In fact, as a high schooler, I was, rightfully rejecting everything that my parents were into, being, very hardcore into jazz. It would only be later in life that I would start to explore my Moroccan musical roots when I started to get interested in global jazz and sort of fusion work. And I had already played a lot of klezmer because I'm a saxophonist and clarinetist. And then it was like, oh, well, wait a minute. This is a soundtrack of my youth. This is a language that I'm actually quite familiar with already. So then that really became the foundation for a lot of the work that would come later.
So I think I can relate for what Samuel said about the music. I think the environment of my parents and my grandparents, of like being a polyglot, like multi-language speaking, is something that I noticed that also in the music there is part of the tradition. And for example, if I may play a piyyut for Shavuot from the Gibraltar synagogue that weaves together Hebrew and Haketiya, the North African dialect of Ladino, and with some Gibraltar Spanish influence. התעוררה לנו ניתנה כמגדל הלבנון בראש ניר וחרמון תשורי מראש המנה התעוררה לנו ניתנה Esta es la excelencia fuente de aguas muy claras que es la luz de nuestras caras. Todo hagan la reverencia, de ella tomamos la licencia. Que nos da esa caladrón, que eleva al jamón. Una gente muy leitana, y toda la nuritana. Y toda la noritana.
Wow, that was great. And do you want to tell us more about that?
Well, this is a piyyut that my grandfather would sing in the synagogue. And his synagogue, the family heritage name for his synagogue was La Snoga Flamenca. Like for me, it was La Snoga Flamenca. Flamenco.
The synagogue of flamenco.
But actually, it's La Snoga Flamenca from the Flemish Amsterdam Jews, Spanish and Portuguese that came to Gibraltar. But I think there's something with this Snoga Flamenca that is right, because it combines the Sephardi Western melodies with Andalusian music and the flamenco. I mean, you know, Gibraltar is like next door is Algeciras, like Paco de Lucia. So when I set up this melody for my orchestra, I put up a little bit of Rodrigo, that actually wrote his concerto in the hotel overlooking my grandmother's apartment, the Bay of Gibraltar. So for me, it's all combined in this little thing that I just played.
The intro even had a little taste of Miles Davis's sketches of
Yeah,
Spain.
the thing.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, you just brought something to mind that there's a debate in the flamencologist community, and I've done some research in flamenco, I've written some stuff on that about where the word flamenco comes from.
Right.
And one of the thoughts is that it comes from the Flemish
Yeah.
word. And so it's interesting to hear that the synagogue itself had the title, because there's always this, you know, debate in the flamenco world of, you know, some Jewish elements in flamenco, right? So there's a couple texts that people point to as Jewish, but this is an interesting little tidbit to add to this.
Yeah, because the official name of the synagogue was the Nefutzot Yehuda Kahal, but the unofficial name from this I think that the early 18th century was La Snoga Flamenca.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm gonna add that footnote to my next link by flamenco. Thank you.
I want to say, as someone who did not research flamenco,
Really?
yes, I know it's surprising.
Sorry,
It's
it's
surprising.
between us.
One of those things is not like the others. But it's beautiful to see how even in this short conversation, there were so many layers of this piyyut, of the music you play, and the way it was reflected in your heritage, and in the stories of the family, and in Miles Davis jazz. And it's beautiful to see how the exact same thing happens in food. Because when I'm thinking of my grandmother's food, I'm thinking, for instance, about chraime. Chraime, if you know it, it's a classic North African dish. It's a spicy tomato sauce with fresh sea fish, usually eating with half a loaf or a loaf, if you mean, of bread. And if you think about it, it's a classic Mediterranean dish, right? Because the shores of Tripoli are not even that far from the shores of Sicily. And obviously we have tomatoes, and obviously we have spicy peppers and olive oil, because it's all there. And you know, the same taste that the Sicilian cuisine would use in the places where they would use garlic and basil, because it's the bottom part of Italy. The Tripolitanian Jews are using cumin and caraway with the garlic instead of basil, and that what actually makes it a North African dish, and of course, fresh sea fish. Now, my grandmother has been making this dish every Shabbat for years, longer than I would remember. And for years, she's only been using either canola oil or soy oil. And being the condescending cook that I am, when I'm cooking chraime, I'm not using, you know, processed oils. I'm only using olive oil, obviously. And for years, I felt bad about it, right? Because does any of us actually think he's better than his grandmother at something? Obviously not. So how could I change something which is like a heirloom recipe? And it took me a while to figure out how weird it was that my grandmother's actually using processed oils instead of olive oil, because if you get to think about it, in the 40s, in Tripoli, I'm not sure someone was using soy oil. Needless to say, canola oil was only invented 20 years later. And I remember asking my grandmothers once I already had a thought of what actually happened, and asked her, "Abel Safta, why aren't you using olive oil for this?" And what was the answer that I received? The only answer I could receive from your grandmother, asking her about her heirloom recipe. What was the answer? Why is she using this oil and not that oil?
What's available in the store?
No, it's a heirloom recipe. It's a family's recipe. What's the only explanation? Guys, come on, what's wrong with you? Why is your grandmother making her, I don't know, Moroccan fish the same way? Why is she making it this way and not that way? Because
Tradition.
Because tradition, exactly, because that's what her mother did.
Yeah.
Now, when I think of Savta Grazia, my great-grandmother, in Tripoli, obviously, she did not use soy oil.
Right.
She used only olive oil. That's all they had. They have tons of olive oil in Tripoli. It's really close to Sicily.
And you know that Brodel and all the people that try to say what is Mediterraneanness, eventually they go to the point that it's the line where the olive oil exists.
Exactly. That's something that really combines all the Mediterranean, and obviously they were using Mediterranean oil, but this recipe has traveled. It started when my grandmother's recipe made Aliyah to Israel, moved to Israel, and let me tell you this, in Israel in the early 50s, there was no olive oil. There was only the Syrian olive oil, which is very, very spicy olive oil, and was used only by Palestinians. And all of the other people, Israel being a very poor state at the time, used processed oils. So they were using soy oil, and my grandmother, who was a 9-year-old when they made Aliyah, was not old enough yet to get into the kitchen and learn how it really was in the old country. So all that she learned was actually the processed or changed, or if you even want to say, faulted recipe that happened after making Aliyah to Israel, and she's been making it only with soy oil ever since.
That's it, at the time of
poverty.
Right. You remember probably that they tried to market this weird pasta, like little
piyyutim.
Yeah, that was
Bedouin rice.
Bedouin rice.
And it's beautiful to see how culinary traditions, this is the
Oh, so what? Good that we have another one.
Okay, we'll pass that one around then.
Yeah.
it's beautiful to see how culinary traditions are being created not just by what was available or how the recipe truly is, but also like things like moving from one country to another. Same thing, by the way, happened in the United States with gefilte fish, that did not used to be fish balls. It used to be a whole fish that was filled with its own meat after the bones were taken out. And same thing happened for many, many times. And I remember how proud I felt when I understood that me cooking chraime only with olive oil is not just me being a condescending cook who thinks his cookings are better than his grandmother's, but it's actually a small act of inheritance in an unaware way.
An act of inheritance in what do you mean?
Because I actually came back to the original recipe without even realizing it. Because my great-grandmother and all those grandmothers before her, in my family, it was only women who were cooking, obviously used only olive oil. And I came back to it not because that was the recipe, or because I thought that was the original recipe. I used olive oil because I thought it was better and would taste better. And being an Israeli, which doesn't have that much respect towards tradition in some cases, and realizing that that's actually also part of tradition was a very heartwarming moment for me.
So I want to talk about me cooking in the
Yes,
kitchen.
please.
Because the heritage, right, is for my mother and father coming to America, it was a very important way to hold on and pass tradition in my family, was through the food. And so many of the heritage words that I think of immediately are food-oriented things, especially because food is so important for creating or perpetuating, reproducing Jewish culture, especially in environments where kashrut is an issue. Pesach was like to the nines, right? Everything was done. So my mother, Aliyah Shalom, it's Mother's Day, I think of her fondly. And
What was her name?
Odette. Yeah. And she, some of the things that she passed to me specifically were food making. So to this day, I was telling somebody earlier, I make couscous by hand on Rosh Hashanah because of my mother. And she called it saladat tubucha. She didn't call it matbucha. They said saladat tubucha. They would swallow the M a little bit. And this I also make by hand for Rosh Hashanah and Pesach. The rest of the time I buy it from the local store.
I assume she used to make it every week.
She didn't make it every week, but she made it enough.
Okay.
It was definitely, she used to make harissa. Her and my father would make harissa from scratch. So these things. But one of the words that sticks with me, which is an important heritage word, was tafina. and not chraime. Right?
We say adafina.
We say adafina,
Adafina, and you say
we would say dafina, but
we call it becha, by the way. Yeah.
Okay, but it was important because my grandmother, as I mentioned before, my grandparents were a mixed marriage in their time, early 20th century, up to this point. You know, the Megorashim and the Toshavim, those from a Sephardi heritage, and those of Amazigh Shlochi heritage, they didn't marry so much, right? They really still perpetuated the kind of differences here. So this is a marker of heritage of my grandmother, that it would be dafina, which is the Hakatiya word. So it was very important, and that's was an important way for me to continue to honor, frankly, the matrilineal line in my stomach, and certainly in my cooking.
Yeah, food words are a big part of heritage words. A lot of the heritage words that I've heard from my guests on this podcast are food words. Ariel, do you want to add any food words before we go on to other semantic domains?
Well, actually, Shmuel took the adafina. So we have the moniata. Moniata is sweet potatoes, and it was the el postre, like the dessert. And when I was small, I didn't buy it as a dessert. Like we would finish the Shabbat, the adafina, and then we would bring these moniata, which are sweet potatoes with some Moroccan spices and canela, a lot of canela, a lot of cinnamon, and all the time we ate the adafina. I said, "Y después el postre," and after that the dessert. So I was waiting for the dessert, and then they brought the moniata. And I said, "Y después el postre." So I didn't buy into that as a dessert, but I think it was a healthy dessert.
I just want to say, I think Ariel is completely right. Sweet potatoes are not a dessert. It's a great side dish, but it's not a dessert, and I think it's part of a wider phenomena, which I allow myself to say. When it comes to actual food, I choose the North African cuisine over the European one on any given moment. Really, I think it's an incredible, rich, wonderful cuisine that's really so superior to the European cuisine. But when it comes to dessert, guys, we have to admit, like our desserts are either sweet potatoes, which like is sweet, so it's a dessert, or just fried dough.
Right.
When that you soak in honey syrup, right? Yes, spinach and tekla and makrot and all of those things. And at the same time, our brothers and sisters in Europe are eating croissants and pain au chocolat and Napoleon rolls and it's like really, I'm sorry, it's not a competition. They completely have it when it comes to desserts.
Okay, well, with food, I can see how there would be some competition, that things that are more delicious win out. But with language, that isn't necessarily the case. When words get transferred from one language to another, it's not necessarily because it's, I don't know, a beautiful sounding word. It just kind of happens, and especially in the home. And Ariel, you started to talk about some other heritage words when you mentioned esnoga de flamenca. And so can you tell us some other, it sounds like that's a word in the religious domain to refer to something historical in your family's synagogue. Okay. And
the strong chef.
Yes.
Yes.
And so tell us about some other words in the religious domain in your home.
Well, there are things that are rituals that are done in the synagogue, and then in the home, one of the most beautiful rituals is the Havdalah. And there's a big tradition of Havdalah songs in Latino. We're not going to get into that. But I always remember the Buena Semana. And I remember that the Havdalah of the high holidays included, especially after Pesach, included lechuga con miel, like lares, especially after Pesach, lares, which was the maror, but with miel, with honey. And my grandmother would take the lares, put the miel, and said, buena salida de Pascua, con bien vaya, y con bien tienes. And always this buena semana, y buena days, when I do Havdalah at home, because I like to sing to my children the Buena Semana.
Buena Semana means good week.
Yeah, Shavuot Tov. And my middle girl Emily says, have a sing buena semana, because when you sing it, I have a good week. Wow. So I sing it so we all have
It works.
a good week. Yeah.
Let's hear it.
Buena semana, Mosterio. Buena semana, Mosterio. Buena semana, Mosterio. Alegres y sanos. Buena semana, Mosterio. Alegres y sanos. A mis hijos bendecir. A mis hijas bendecir. Que me los deje Dios vivir alegres y sanos. Buena semana, del Dios, alegres y sanos. Buena semana, del Dios, alegres y sanos.
Wow. So your heritage words are very much tied in with the music that you inherited and the ritual in your home. And your heritage words are very much tied in with the foods that you inherited. Do you want to add another?
I actually want to add another, because one of the most meaningful heritage words in my family is actually the word Allah, which means God in Arabic. And it's not a secret that as an Israeli, we've been in a constant war with people who speak Arabic for the past, let's say, 140 years. And many times, Allah, especially the term Allah Akbar, which many times terrorists are using as their final act, is very scary in Islam. But for me, Allah, which is the name of God, it means Allah, meaning the God. And for me, that was God's name. That was part of God's name, just like Elohim. And up until this day, when my grandmother's blessing me, she's saying Allah ma'ak, which means in Arabic, God is with you. Or my second grandmother, Safta Ruti, may she rest in peace, used to say Ma'akam Allah, which means God is with you, only in a different order of the words. And I think it's beautiful because, again, I never had any kind of negative thought or notion towards the word Allah, which many Israelis, see as the word of the enemy, the word the enemy uses in terrible terrorist attacks. For me, it was just part of God's name, although I have to say, never, ever, ever in my life would my grandmother say something like Allah Akbar, which means God is great, which is a very, very, very Muslim call, used also in Muslim prayer, in the Salah, in one of the 5 prayers. But again, Allah was used as a way to bless us. When someone was, if someone is choking, so they're saying Smala, which means Ism Allah, the name of God. So when you say the name of God, you should be respectful. So it's supposed to help you stop choking. And so it always had a very positive, say, atmosphere to me.
So that's a seamless transition to what I was going to also talk about, because my mother and father we would hear Bismillah, but a lot of times the Barakallah, that you should be blessed, basically Baruch Hashem, the Barakallah, but and so that was very prominent, and I had a very similar experience. It was never, and to this day, it's not doesn't have that connotation that raises those anxieties, and exactly the same experience, but many, many miles away from where you were growing up, right? In a very different context. Another interesting twist on this, however, was that the American experience in Morocco brought things back with my father that changed the language. So, for instance, in Morocco, the locals would often refer to chewing gum, which is chewing gum that they would get from the Americans, right? That's a word in Moroccan Arabic now, and you can hear it in some songs from that time. But my father and a lot of the folks on the base would refer to local men, oftentimes as hamdullahs. And this came from Hamdullah, right? That because they would meet these Arab guys and they would say, Hamdullah, Hamdullah, all the time. This was their response to the American GIs. So when they're coming back to America, so we actually grew up in California with a sense that like a regular guy from the Arabic world, from Morocco, would be a Hamdullah.
Which actually means thank God.
Exactly,
Right.
which is another way of bringing in Allah.
Well, I learned recently a term for that, referring to a group with a linguistic feature associated with them. Great term, shibbolethnonym. Shibbolethnonym, like a shibboleth is from the biblical story of the, yeah, exactly, you say sh or s, and you're killed for being part of the group, that that linguistic feature identifies you. And so if someone is identified by the linguistic feature of saying hamdallah, then that's a shibbolethnonym.
Can I tell a beautiful story about this and food?
Yeah.
So my favorite coffee is Americano. Now Americano coffee is actually real because Americano means American, but it's not in English. In which language is it? In Italian, obviously, right? And it's because the American soldiers, the American GIs who stayed in Sicily and southern Italy after World War II were coming to the local cafes and they wanted to have a cafe. And when you ask for a coffee in Italy, you're only getting an espresso, obviously, which is very, very strong and very concentrated and completely incapable of being digested by an American GI. And they always asked to make it weaker, so if you could just pour half a cup of water on this tiny little
I don't think the thing was about getting it weaker. I think it's about getting it bigger. Remember, bigger cars, bigger buildings, bigger airplanes.
And terrible coffee. It has to be said.
I must say, I'm with you on that though. Because even to this day, if I order an Americano, I always have to explain half a cup, just a touch of water. They always ruin it. Even this morning I had to have my coffee redone because it was too much water.
I just want to say I'm so sorry to hear, and that's part of the prices people pay for living in this country. And so Americano was really the way that Italian baristas used to describe this weak, big American coffee that they used to make for the American GI. They just call it Americano.
Okay, we heard some expressions with God, and some of those were used as terms of endearment. Do you have other terms of endearment that you remember hearing from your grandparents or your parents?
Maybe you have to explain to the Israelis the endearment thing.
Oh, term of endearment, like sweetie, love, love bug, honey.
I have one.
Well, I think this is a moment to interject that again, French was an important lingua franca. It was an important language, right, for the Moroccan Jews to this day. Obviously, even in Morocco, it still distinguishes the Jewish community. They prefer to speak French in Casablanca to this day. So a lot of those kinds of mon chéri, ma chérie, that was like what was expected. That's what we heard mostly.
Many times we heard Wuldi for my father, who doesn't even speak Arabic. He speaks only Hebrew, who was born and raised in Israel. But he would say Wuldi, which means my child. In Arabic, like Waldi, exactly. Walad means a child in Arabic. So Wuldi is my child, my boy. And also, and that always brings a smile when I'm thinking of it, my father's nickname to my mom, he calls her Marchi, which means Marathi in Arabic, which is my wife. So Marchi in the Tripolitanian way of saying.
Our endearment is usually making things smaller. So Arielito, my mother Silvita, or mi cariño, so make it smaller, make it cuter. Not this big boy that doesn't want to eat the moniatas. But so I remember that, Arielito, and that is, I think, very, very Spanish, and also in Ladino, like to make it like cute and small.
I want to ask if it's okay, and even though no one in my family ever spoke Latino, would it be okay if I brought up a beautiful name that comes from Latino that was used in my friend's house? Just want to make sure I'm not culturally appropriating anyone. So a friend of mine grew up in this Jerusalemite household, and his grandmother was a true Jerusalemite, coming from one of Jerusalem's most prestigious North African families, and she used to call him Codilo. And she used to call him Codilo, Codilo, Codilo to him and his brother. That was one of their most favorite nicknames, and that's how he grew up knowing that Codilo. And this, he thought, it's like, something like sweetie, honey, sugar, right? Codilo, it's cute. And then he was, he was living his life knowing that Codilo is this special name that his grandmother used to call him. And I think it was somewhere in his 50s when he met this old Jerusalemite woman. And he said, he was speaking, he's a speaker and a chef, and his name is Gil Chovav, and he said that his grandmother used to call him and his brother Codilo. And at the end of the lecture, this woman came to him, honey, do you know what Codilo means? And he said, yes, it's like sweetie, honey, sugar. And she said, no, Codil is the bottom of the chicken.
Which maybe it's tasteful.
It's juicy.
It's juicy. So
Well, yeah, a lot of terms of endearment use food words, and it's interesting how the words, we've been talking about heritage words, but this is also heritage morphemes, right? Just a little bit of the word, the ito, ido, iko, right? And you mentioned Nissimmi, you mentioned the accent that your grandmother has when she talks to her siblings. That's also a heritage phonology, right? It's not a word, but it's something that we inherit that becomes part of the way we speak, even in our new vernacular.
yes, I think that my mother always say like echad shulchan, like one table in English, but in Hebrew you say shulchan echad, or echad and sort of stuck with me for many years, like the way she said it, and so
Yeah, heritage syntax. That's good.
Yeah, and to the previous point, I mean, growing up in the American context, and we see this in Brooklyn, for instance, the island was always very present in our Hebrew. So we didn't have the deracination of this that like you experienced in the Israeli context. So, and because we had close proximity and contact with our French family, and then of course in America just generally, it was that was the way that we pronounced Hebrew.
We're running short on time, but I want to just mention that our languages are heirlooms. We heard about an heirloom recipe, and we have heard a lot about liturgy being transmitted from generation to generation, also as an heirloom, and food and music and art and so many other things. We often think of our heirlooms as tangible things like jewelry or a Kiddush cup or candlesticks, but our intangible culture is also an heirloom. But it's a little bit different. I mean, when we have physical heirlooms in our house, we often use them in different ways than our ancestors did, or maybe they just sit on a shelf and they remind us of our ancestors when we look at them. And they can be lost, and that's the same with culture as well. And so I think it's great that you are all preserving your ancestral cultures through music, through food, and as we do at the Jewish Language Project, through language. And I want to just give you an opportunity to reflect on that concept of culture as heirloom. Let's start with Ariel.
well, I'm devoted to telling the story of my family, because I felt coming from such a small community, if I will not speak, if I will not write about it, if I will not, so it became part of my activity as a musician, as a composer, although I didn't start like that. I had a rock band when I was 17, but pretty much into my years when I studied music, I understood I'm talking with my grandfather. And if I'm doing that, I should research that. And so if I'm going into that heritage or that tradition, and if I want to say sort of do it in my way, but I should know very well from where it's coming. So that's what I'm trying to do. And you know, and another very important thing that I take with me as an Israeli is the term of convivencia. Convivencia is co-living. And I think beyond music, this is like a very important thing because, you know, we live in a country, especially in these times, that we think we're going to be in an endless war. But I remember when my grandfather would finish his tefillah, the imam would say Shabbat Shalom, Senor Beniso. And I also remember when my grandfather did the special Yigdal of the Chagim, which is a beautiful Portuguese melody, the bishop would come from the church. Gibraltar is very small, you know, you have in the same street a mosque, a synagogue, and a church, and a restaurant. A kosher deli. So yes. And so he would come to the door and listen to him do the Yigdal. And that stayed with me. And one time, I just decided I'm taking this Yigdal to my guitar and echoing it, so I remember of that kind of convivencia. So it sort of sounds like this. Thank you. אלוקים חי ונשתבח נמצא It's a very low key for me singing, but for the guitar it's good. But what I wanted to say that this melody that brought together the bishop and the imam to listen to my grandfather is echoing through my guitar with my little arrangement, and this is the sound of convivencia.
I love how you extended convivencia from the historical era of Jews, Christians, and Muslims living together in Spain to a broader concept of what we should aspire to, but also what already happens, right? In Jewish communities throughout the diaspora, throughout history, Jews have been both a part of and apart from the surrounding society, right? They've been living with non-Jews, and you see that reflected in the languages, in the names, in the music, in the food. And that is, when we're thinking about, is this tune from the time of the temple? No, it's not, because it's from some period of Jewish history where it's been influenced by the surrounding society. There may be elements of something that came from the temple. And same with the foods. Chraime is not something that that Jews had in ancient Israel, right? But
fish was not part of what was served.
Okay, but there may be some elements, like kashrut, the not mixing meat and milk, is something that Jewish communities have had throughout the years. And same with language. Our languages are, Yiddish is based on German and Judeo-Arabic is based on Arabic, but there are Hebrew words. There are other things that we have inherited throughout the generations. Our heritage words include our Hebrew words that come from antiquity.
Yes, I think Mediterranean Jewishness, but also all Jews, it's like quantum physics. It's like the friction between the partials, it what makes the reality, the essence Is that what we see? Is this continuous friction and continuous evolvement and things that one inspires the other, and this is our journey, a thread that goes like this.
To circle back on the heirlooms idea, within culture. So for my family, definitely, like, we had a feeling within the Jewish community of really being the only Sephardic family in our community. And so the expressive culture elements were vital heirlooms for asserting who we were within this frame of Jewish life, to make sure that it was understood that there was more to the story of Jewish life and diversity than what was present in that particular synagogue space. And so one of those ways was, within the synagogue context, was to clap in a certain kind of Moroccan way, which is a very loud, full, sort of. You're from Gibraltar, but it's more like which has a very high pitch to it. So just as a funny aside, last night that was my contribution to Nance's concert from the audience.
I have to say that I really love the concept of heirlooms, not just only as physical elements, but also as words and, let's say, more spiritual things. I really love working with food because I feel like food gives us something physical to touch. Once we talk about memory, about longing or tradition, all of a sudden it's not, just a vague concept. It's something that you can actually touch, you can actually eat, you can actually taste. And it reminds me of the word chad, which is being pronounced this way, and it means with happiness, with kindness. And that's the request you're usually getting when you ask your grandmother to make you something to eat. So she'd serve you whatever it is, whether it's an heirloom dish like chraime or tbecha or tbit or tfina, and she would, or just, an omelet or a sandwich, but she would always say chad, and I think it beautifully combines both of them, both what the food and the actual thing is, but also what's the atmosphere, what's the tone in which it should be served.
I think what makes special everything in our culture, music and food and everything, is the social aspect that ratifies either the food or the music. I mean, we sing piyyutim together. We eat together. And that's something that sort of brings us together, all these things, and that's the most important thing.
That's a great way to end. Thank you so much to our panelists today. And thank you so much to our audience for attending. If you're interested in doing a live taping of the Heritage Words podcast, you can reach out through the Jewish language website. And if you're interested in bringing resources like this bag that says Shabbat Shalom in many different Jewish languages, you can go to jewishlanguages.org and find all of that information. Thank you so much. Heritage Words is a partnership of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Language Project and HUC Connect, supported by tax-deductible donations from listeners like you. I'm the producer and host, Sarah Bunin-Benor. Kyle Elbaz Fingerhut is assistant producer, Avishai Artsy is editor, and Talia Ehrenberg is video editor. The music is from Maurice El Medioni's French and Algerian Arabic album Café Oran, featuring the Klezmatics David Krakauer and Frank London, courtesy of Piranha Records. This podcast is one of the many ways the Jewish Language Project raises awareness about the diversity of the Jewish people and the phenomenon of heritage words. We also have online crowdsourced dictionaries where you can find the words mentioned in each episode. Our social media posts include Music Mondays, Jewish Word of the Week, and Fun Facts. And we offer free educational materials and exhibits that you can visit online or display in a synagogue, museum, or community center. Contact us about our live tapings, study tours, and sponsorship opportunities. Looking for gifts for Shabbat dinners and Passover seders? Check out our whimsical and educational t-shirts, tote bags, posters, stickers, and aprons. You can find all this content and donate, volunteer, or sign up for our email list at jewishlanguages.org. Thank you, merci mucho, ilaha yaviloch, ashenem dank, shukran, soch boshi, toda rabah.